Zack, and I read Zero to One by Peter Thiel, coincidentally another member of the PayPal Mafia. They're a very intricate group and very successful group, as you can see. So let's start off with the concept of Zero to One. So this is pretty much the premise of the entire book. So Thiel basically says that in order to have the most successful type of startup, that you have to pursue basically something new, something that nobody's ever done before. And so it says where he gets the idea, the name of Zero to One. And so a lot of individuals pursue like horizontal type of growth where they simply take one thing that's already exists and they build upon it, they try to add to it, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's just not the most successful way that someone can develop their own startup. So for example, when Peter Thiel was starting his PayPal, it was a completely revolutionary concept, and it was something that he came up with. And so he's talking about this vertical growth, and so instead of moving horizontally, improving on something else, he's just coming up with something entirely new. And it relates a lot to technology. He thinks that technology is pretty much the growth for the future. And so you need to come up with some type of new technology, because if we remain stagnant, then we'll just continue along the same level and never grow. And so that's what the entire book is based in. And so he says he has basically this concept, this question that he says will help you develop a new idea. And it's a very contrarian question, very unpopular. And it's basically like, what do you agree with? What do you believe that nobody else believes? And that's where you can get your idea from, because it basically helps you develop something that nobody else is trying to pursue. It helps you ask the question, what company is nobody trying to create right now? And so that's where he thinks that success is defined, is finding that one place that nobody's explored yet. And by asking these questions, it's basically telling you, like, seeing where everybody else is going and going the opposite direction. And at times it can be very conflicting, but it's what breeds the best success. And he uses this quote. It says, brilliant thinking is rare, but courage is even shorter in supply, because people are too scared to try and like branch out from startups that have already been proven to work. And so that's where the biggest success comes from, is from taking that courage and applying it somewhere new. So basically there are several ways that once you develop your idea to enter the market. The first that he talks about is the first mover. So that's where you originally come up with the idea yourself, and you start creating it. You're the first person to ever reach this area. And so from here, you can basically control the market, you can control the pace of things, but competitors, they'll start to catch up, but they won't have the near headway that you do. And you'll be able to control the pace of things up until everybody starts to catch up. The problem is that it's not an end goal of being the first mover. It's only a tactic of trying to build yourself to develop some sort of monopoly over a startup. And the actual end goal is to develop the last mover advantage. So once that idea is in place, then you just go from 0 to 1 on a new idea, and you build it up. So from there, you basically have the last great revolutionary development in something that nobody else can ever compete with. And so from there, you basically dominate the competition, and there's no way that they can reach that same level that you have. And so he continues to talk about basically like the foundations of startup, and like once you have that startup, once you have that mover advantage, like what's going to make sure it grows. And he says that if you have a foundation that isn't solid, that isn't without conflict, or I think he says that it can't be fixed, then there's no way that your startup will succeed. So if you have, like, while you're developing your startup, if you hire the wrong person and you keep them in for too long, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, if you choose the wrong partner, obviously you can't get rid of your co-founder unless you buy them out or something along those lines. And if they disagree with you, or if they just don't mesh with your team, they don't align well with your team, then you're never going to succeed like properly in the startup world. And most likely your startup's just going to fail, or you're going to have to find some new way to get rid of that problem, which is very difficult, because the foundation, it lays the ground for everything you're going to be doing. And so if you have one bad investment, one bad partner, the startup is a very fragile world, and that fragility can lead to the biggest chaos, like, very easily. And so if you end up failing in this sense, then there's no way that your startup will succeed. So this book is very long, so I can't really go over everything that he has. Every single page basically introduces a new concept, and it's like 200 pages. But I think that this is like a good closing point. This is how he finishes it. So basically, one theorist comes up with this idea of different patterns for the future. It's very applicable to like anything in the world. I think the original theory was to the human race in general, all the different directions we can take as a human race, but Thiel applies it to the business realm. and says that there are 4 possible futures for a business, which is recurrent collapse. Recurrent collapse is where you have constant ups and downs. Pretty much the future is going to look exactly like the present because you're always going to be having those waves, those bumps, and it's never going to get better or worse. It's just constant up and down. And there's a plateau where you slowly rise and then you just reach a point and you stop. And just from there, it's that horizontal movement. It just never stops growing from there. And then there's extinction, where you start to grow, but then something happens, like you chose a bad partner, you hired the wrong person, or maybe you just didn't manage your money well, and you immediately fail, and you can't come back from that as a startup because it's too difficult. You go bankrupt. It's very difficult to survive that crash. And then there's the takeoff, which is the most successful method of producing like a startup, but also the most difficult to achieve. It's where you experience that slow growth. And then, so he says you have to start small. When you start developing your monopoly, you start small, and then you scale it upward. And so it eventually results in like high scale growth, which is the eventual takeoff, and then the high success that he experienced, and the rest of the PayPal Mafia experienced. And I think that's it.